Thank you so much for letting me talk today. As mentioned, I'm new to this group, um, and so yeah, I'm really excited to be here. So yeah, thank you so much. I'm a PhD student at the University of Birmingham, UK, and I am in the maths department. But I'm doing, as I think Michael said, I'm doing my PhD on sort of the transition to university, and I'm particularly interested in higher education. I'm being supervised by Michael Grove, so all of this work is joint work with him. Um, Also, because I am new to this group, I do apologise if anything that I'm talking about is repeated or it's obvious, but I just thought I would pitch it at what I thought was an accessible level. So hopefully that's okay. Okay, cool. So a bit of an overview of the talk that I'm going to give today. I'm going to start with some literature. I'm going to be talking about a survey that we did. So I'm going to talk about some literature sort of motivating my PhD topic altogether. I'm then going to talk about some background specific literature for the study that I'm presenting today. I'll talk through the methodology that we employed, and then I'm going to sort of do the results and discussion together, and finally finish with some potential further work, and maybe talk about a little bit what I'm doing in my PhD sort of now and onwards. Okay, cool. So start with some literature. So there's a joint report 30 years ago by the London Mathematical Society, the Institute of Maths and its Applications, and the Royal Statistical Society, talking about what they coined the mathematics problem, which referred to students being underprepared for the more rigorous nature of the mathematical components of their course. And although the mathematics problem wasn't necessarily originally it wasn't necessarily referring to math students specifically, it was referring to more like STEM students and engineering students. This phenomenon is something that we do see in maths as well, that students are coming in underprepared. So one response implemented by many universities was to set up the provision of mathematics support, which is support in addition to the regular teaching hours provided by in-course. So this is something where students can go to a math support centre and get help. And originally, the users or the intended users of math support were people non-math. Sorry. Sorry, I wasn't sure whether somebody was saying something, but I'm going to carry on. So
you're okay.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so initially the intended users of mathematics support were either non-mathematicians, so engineering students, or maybe nurses who had mathematical components of their course, but they hadn't done maths since school. And they were also people who might be deemed at risk. So this is people who might be on the verge of failing modules or even dropping out of their course. And mathematics support could be there to really support them in those times and get them back on track. However, there is now recent evidence, and actually there's been evidence existing for a while, that specialist math students, so that's people studying for a single or joint honours maths course, are using mathematics support. Further, these students aren't necessarily the ones that are at risk. They are students who might be getting high 2-1s but really want to get a first. So they're going to math support to seek excellence in their modules. There is also some evidence more recently that the same students are not engaging in departmental organised learning opportunities, despite them being arguably similar to math support. So, for example, they're not coming to drop-in support sessions run by the department, they're going straight to the math support centre to go and get help. So, I guess a big question that I would like to try and answer at least in part for my PhD, is why are mathematics students choosing to access support but not engaging with in-course resources? The fact that they might be choosing to go to the Math Support Centre first might suggest that we are missing something in the department, or we're doing something wrong, or it's very possibly far more complicated than that, and there is a multitude of reasons why students might prefer to go to math support. But essentially, what I would like to look into is their reasons for doing so, and then also looking at math support and thinking, what do they do? Are there lessons we can learn from math support and apply this to in-course teaching to enhance the learning experience for students? That's kind of the motivation behind my PhD project. And the first part of my PhD, I wanted to start by getting some staff perspectives. So I wanted to go and ask staff, what do you think the challenges are that students face at the transition to university? What are they struggling with? What works well? What doesn't work well? And also, what support do they have in place for students at the transition to university already? Hopefully then, the results of this, amongst other projects that I'm doing, will be able to inform interventions and changes. So my PhD is sort of based more on educational policy, I guess. Okay, so some more background specific to looking at staff perspectives now, which was our survey that we sent out. I've just picked out some studies and just given an example. So there are others. But yeah, there have been experiences and challenges from the student perspective on a sort of broad level, what they liked about their course, what they didn't like once they'd graduated. There was a very small scale study on staff's views of students 15 years ago. This was only done across 4 universities and wasn't actually published as a paper. There has then been work into looking at student experiences specifically with lectures, how they find them, and yeah, kind of looking at the fact that didactic teaching might not be the best way to teach students. And more recently, there has been 2 international studies investigating staff views of student struggles, but these were with quite specific content. So this was looking at students' struggles with mathematical analysis or algebra. And what we want to come and do is essentially gain a broader overview. So rather than looking, a specific content might be a subset of what we find, but we sort of want to look more broadly about what staff think the challenges are. Further, the second study, the 2023 study, did recommend that people looked at staff views of students within specific educational contexts, which, so for us, we were looking specifically in the UK to sort of, they were talking about the benefits of if people look in specific educational contexts, we can then compare and contrast. So where our study comes in is we get a larger sample of staff perspectives than has what been done before in the UK. As I just mentioned, we're focusing solely within the UK, and also we employed a slightly different methodology to previous studies by requesting that people answered the survey on behalf of their department, so we could get sort of departmental insights rather than just lots of personal opinions. And I will talk about that in the methodology a little bit as well. So to recap so far, the research questions that this study sought to answer is, what, if any, challenges do staff believe first-year students face at the transition to studying mathematics at university? And what, if any, interventions do departments have in place to support first-year mathematics students at the transition to university? So, in terms of our methodology, we aimed the survey at heads of education, directors of teaching, first-year directors, or staff within similar roles within mathematics departments across the UK. And these individuals were asked to complete the survey on behalf of their institution. So, as I sort of mentioned, we weren't looking for loads and loads of responses necessarily by getting 20 staff members from one institution and then 0 from others. We sort of aim for breadth. So we targeted institutions and asked them, can you nominate somebody to answer this survey on behalf of your department? We then performed a thematic analysis on the qualitative questions following the methodology outlined in Braun and Clark. We did have some quantitative questions in there as well, but every single quantitative question also had a qualitative question in there. And we've really focused on the qualitative data because that really told us, that gave us a lot more insight into what the views were. And we managed to get 30 departments to respond to the survey. And of the departments that responded, the students studying there represent 70% of the undergraduate mathematics student population within the UK. And we'd taken this sort of extent of survey reach from a previous paper. The survey was quite lengthy. I think the average response time was about 30 to 40 minutes. So we are really, really grateful for the people who took the time to give us their thoughts. So perfect. So for the results, I'm going to present a thematic analysis here and talk through the 4 themes that we identified. So the first one we called mathematical preparedness and fluency. The second one is learner expectations. The third one is engagement with learning. And the last one we called skills for success. So I'm going to go through each of these one by one. The 4 themes tend to, they're focused upon the challenges that staff recognise, but I'm going to present any interventions that departments reported having within the discussion of these themes as well. Okay, so the first one is mathematical preparedness and fluency, and we define this to be remarks relating to students' preparedness for and ability working with new content. And the frequency count there shows the number of departments that mention this at least once. And so, as you can see, lots of departments said that students struggle with pure maths proof and abstraction. This is not surprising. This is something that has been talked about for a long time. However, people did acknowledge that students were very good with familiar and routine material, specifically algorithmic examples was a big one that staff thought students were pretty good at. And 6 departments said they felt students were just underprepared for content in general. So just, yeah, for university study in general, specific to maths, they're just underprepared for it. And a quote to demonstrate this is, I think too many don't have mastery of the basics, such as simplifying fractions, factorising quadratics and cubics, indices, etc., which can then cause issues when tackling unfamiliar topics. So I think even though this theme wasn't necessarily surprising to come out of the thematic analysis, I think one thing that is interesting is that staff continue to report the underpreparedness of students. And this has been going on for a long time, since the LMS report that I mentioned at the beginning. And so in the UK, we've had 2 A-level curriculum reforms since the report was released. So A-levels are the pre-university qualifications. And even with the 2 curriculum reforms, staff are still reporting that students are underprepared. So I guess the question is, what are they doing about it? What are departments doing to tackle the fact that students seem to be really underprepared for this content? Some departments reported that they had made efforts to ease the transition to new content by reforming their own curriculum. It was only a small number of departments, I think about 3, mentioned that they'd done this, but none of them mentioned how successful it had been. And other departments had reported that they were not really sure how to change the content to make it easier. And related to this, the majority of departments, so the ones who hadn't reported changing their curriculum or adapting it, basically stated that they believed that their content was at an appropriate level, and they attributed any student struggles and underpreparedness to pre-university education, which is in line with the findings of Thomas in 2015, where they found also that any issues raised by staff was often blamed on the pre-university education. It was the students that were underprepared rather than the university curriculum. And I guess my comment on that is whether that is right or not, we can't really we can't change what the schools are doing. Certainly not in the UK, we don't have any control over that. So if we're seeing lots of underprepared students coming in, it sort of prompts us to think maybe we should try and tackle it, because at the end of the day, they've come to university and we do have a duty to make sure that they succeed in it. It's in everyone's interest that students become better at maths. Another quote to demonstrate this was, "It is clear that students neither have mastery nor fluency in this material to a sufficient degree." And this material referred to the A-level content that students were expected to come in with. Okay, so that was the first theme. The second theme was learner expectations. So this was concerns about unrealistic expectations of university mathematics. And 13 departments said that students were surprised by the different nature of mathematical content at university. So this referred to both the differing nature of the type of maths that they're seeing, with it being a little bit more abstract, but it also referred to the content in general. So I've got a quote on the next slide that says that students are surprised to see programming in their course, and there were other comments about this, about students not liking the fact that they've got to use a computer, or the fact that they've got to write essays in 3rd year when they do their dissertation. And they thought that they'd escaped that by picking maths. 12 departments said that they believed students underestimate the workload required for university mathematics, and a handful said they thought students seemed really unfamiliar with the teaching methods. This referred to students not really knowing how to learn effectively at university and not knowing how to use the teaching hours in order to learn, specifically in lectures as well. So a couple of quotes to demonstrate. So yeah, as I mentioned, a wider group of students are surprised to encounter programming. And for underestimating the workload, first year students mostly have no idea about the academic life and workload they will face. So that handful of departments that I'd mentioned about the teaching methods, some staff members sort of not only reported that they believed students were unfamiliar with how to learn, but also that students weren't clear on the purpose or the importance of lectures. So we did have, even though it was only 5 staff members mentioning this, the ones that did sort of focused on it a fair bit, about the fact that students don't even think that attending lectures is important anymore, and they've got other means to source information. And this is something that has been sort of spoken about before. So students have been critical of the teaching methods in mathematics. We have a national student survey that is sent out every year to final year students, asking for their experience. And the teaching methods in mathematics always score really low compared to other subjects. I can't imagine why, but apparently staff don't make the content interesting. I think that's one of the questions in the survey that maths scored particularly low at. So anyway, it's really important that we consider this and think about how we can adapt teaching methods to make them more interesting, because there's literally a couple of talks ago somebody talking about motivational examples. Making the teaching more interesting for students is really important to get more engagement. So one department did detail that they wanted to trial non-traditional lecturing. So they sort of described that they wanted to move away from traditional didactic lectures, and they wanted to make them more like classes, like school classes, where students learn the content and practice it before moving on. They didn't detail any sort of how this would happen any more than that, just that they had a desire to do that at some point. And actually, non-traditional lecturing, including problem-based learning, increased peer interaction, and collaborative group work, have been shown to enhance students' understanding and improve their performance. So this is something that would be really good for departments to look at, to explore more of. However, we do sort of acknowledge that in large classes, this type of non-traditional lecturing might not be practical or feasible, and some lecturers might be quite resistant to changing the types of teaching methods. But there is a paper by Lara Alcock that details numerous strategies that are easy to implement for increased engagement. And this is stuff that Lara talks about, the fact that she implements these in her lectures. She teaches a large mathematical analysis course of about 200, 300 students, and she incorporates small quizzes. She encourages interaction between students sitting next to each other. She provides gappy notes for them to fill in and gives them time to go through examples. Just small things that can easily be put into a lecture to sort of get a balance between moving towards more of a sort of active learning approach, whilst teaching maths that might be difficult to do in a problem-based learning setting. The third theme was engagement with learning. So this was staff comments on students' engagement with different learning opportunities, and most departments really, really focused on the fact that learning was very passive from students. And in fact, I didn't talk about the frequency of these themes being mentioned, because I've only got the frequency for the sub-themes, but all 4 themes were mentioned by all participants at some point. But engagement with learning was the one that was really, really prominent in our analysis, and it was kind of mentioned twice more than the others in terms of the frequency of mentions by participants. So yeah, people really focused on the fact that learning was passive. So what this means is the fact that students are reluctant to engage in basically things where they're expected to participate directly. So, for example, where they might be expected to ask questions or speak up, or actually attend things to go and ask for help. So this was drop-in classes, problems classes, tutorials, office hours, stuff like that. And in fact, they focused on the fact that students were far better at engaging with passive learning opportunities where they're just expected to turn up and then leave. So, for example, lectures, but this also included lecture notes and virtual learning environment resources as well. The next sub-theme is that staff sort of focused on the fact that engagement was driven by summative but not formative assessment. So the fact that students will only ever do stuff that counts, and whenever they set formative work, even if they tell students that it's going to be beneficial, students don't, they observe a real lack of engagement from students with this type of work. Another thing that a lot of departments mentioned was a low engagement with feedback from students. Lots and lots of people said that they think that students don't even bother looking at the feedback that they're given. And then a smaller number of departments spoke about students' reliance on strategic learning techniques. So sort of concerns that they just relied on rote learning methods. So a couple of quotes to demonstrate this. So we still see poor uptake of support, particularly office hours. Engagement is driven by summative but not formative assessment. Few make any attempt at the plentiful amount of formative work set. Low engagement with feedback. Too often they completely ignore written feedback. So given that staff said that student learning was very passive and they're really reluctant to attend support sessions and stuff like that, what was interesting is that over half of the departments that reported having a math support centre stated that it was really well utilised by first year students. So again, this sort of goes back to the point I was making at the beginning about there being more evidence now that students are not necessarily engaging in departmental learning opportunities, but going to math support instead. So I guess a question is, yeah, what is it about math support that might be good for students? What do they like about it? And previous studies have shown that students have cited the friendliness and the convenience of math support in their reasons for engaging with it. And I think this indicates a mismatch in maybe the type of support that students want compared to what is currently offered. It might be, this is definitely something that warrants further work, but it might be that we really need to look into the type of support that is currently offered, and ask students, what do you want to get out of a session? What is it that you like? And also educating staff members on the importance of sort of being, I guess, friendly and open to helping students. One department did report that they had really emphasised to staff over the past few years the importance of being friendly and offering non-judgmental support, and they found that that actually really helped. But all the rest of the departments just spoke about the fact that nobody engages in office hours, basically. So on the topic of sort of math support, Lawson et al. Discuss the neutral space offered by mathematics learning support as a key factor in its success. So they talk about the fact that when students need to go to office hours, they have to go and enter a lecturer's space, and this can be quite intimidating for students. And actually, because math support is like a neutral ground for students, that they might feel more comfortable going and asking for help. And actually, one of our respondents did describe that they'd run a departmental initiative running lunchtime drop-in sessions during which the basement of the mathematics building becomes our learning cafe. So this was, they run this learning cafe from 12 till 2 every day of the week, and staff members take it in turns to sit in there and wait for students to come in and ask for help. And I think that this was an alternative to the traditional office hour structure. And I think that I really like this idea because it takes it into a more informal learning space, something where students are going to be familiar with it. Students will be walking in and out of the basement building because it was a study space for this department. And the fact that it becomes a learning cafe also means that it's a bit more friendly for students. And anyway, the staff members that are there, I think the important thing is that they might not be able to help with every single query that comes to them. So students might go and they want to ask a question about analysis, and the only lecturers that are there on that day are their mechanics lecturers and whatever. And maybe they go and they ask help and the lecturer says, I'm not sure. This isn't a bad thing, because not only does it break down the barrier of students thinking that lecturers are sort of, they know everything, but also going and getting help and overcoming that initial barrier is really important for then seeking further help. So if they come and say to lecturers, I don't know how to do this, and the lecturer says, I don't know either. However, go and see so and so in their office, they'll be able to help you. It sort of makes it a little bit easier and makes asking for help into a less intimidating process for students. I mentioned this earlier, but one department also described how they did not have set office hours, but encouraged their staff and their staff to be approachable and find time to see students on request. And yeah, again, this might not be practical for all staff members. They might not be able to just be available for students to come and knock on their door. But I think the encouraging staff to be approachable and friendly is the important thing here. And if it works for certain staff members to be available on request, then great. But yeah, the point is the approachable and friendliness. And then in terms of feedback, obviously lots of staff members said that students don't engage with feedback at all. However, some staff members did go further and said that they're not actually sure how to give feedback themselves. And actually this was 5 departments had mentioned this, that they weren't really sure how best to give feedback. And this is it's really great that people are acknowledging this, but it really emphasizes the fact that something needs to be done about it then. We need to get clearer on what feedback is going to be good for students, what are they going to use, and what feedback can staff give, so that they feel like they're being useful as well. And a couple of other departments had also said that no training is offered to students to make the best use of it anyway. Again, highlighting the fact that maybe students actually need to be told how best to use feedback, and just expecting them to be able to do it, it probably indicates a mismatch in the expectations of staff and students. But an interesting paper, actually, from Grove and Good in 2019, they found that students regularly sourced feedback from their friends. This sort of links onto another point that I want to make, which is the importance of fostering collaboration between students. If students like getting feedback from their friends and that's a positive learning experience for them, then departments should consider how they can encourage more collaboration between students then. And this has also been highlighted 20 years ago, the fact that Brown et al. Found that feeling a sense of community amongst maths students contributed to a better student experience, and other papers have found similar things. So on this topic, we'd asked departments, do you have study spaces available exclusively for mathematics students? And 18 respondents said that their department did have dedicated study spaces. However, 7 said they either have very limited or no such space available. So very limited was them basically saying we hardly have any space in the department, so we restrict it to 4th years only. So in terms of this first year transition to university, basically 7 departments said that they had no real dedicated space for students to work together. Instead, they would have to go to the centralised library. But obviously, for students who might not have established friendship groups, or maybe commuting students who only come in like every so often into university, going to the centralised library where there's loads of people from lots of other subjects, you're not necessarily going to feel a sense of community in your department. Whereas by having dedicated study spaces available in the department, people can then come in, go and sit there and know that they're surrounded by other mathematicians. Now, obviously, the 7 departments that had no such space, that's not going to be their fault necessarily. That's not something that departments themselves will be able to control. However, it's definitely worth considering that if you don't have much space available for math students to sort of sit and collaborate together, it might be more important to run math specific social events and to put more effort into bringing people together and giving students the opportunity to meet others on their course. 15 of the respondents that did have dedicated study space said that they actively encourage their students to make use of this space, and they raise awareness of them so that students know they're there to be used. So this was by running social events and by advertising them in lectures or running support sessions in them as well. And this is a really positive finding from our survey, is that departments are trying to get students to use those spaces to work together. Finally, skills for success. So this was remarks about students not having or quickly developing essential skills needed to succeed at university. So most departments said that they thought that students had difficulty managing their learning. So this was struggling with time management, meeting deadlines, and keeping up with the course. Half of departments said they believed students lacked independence. 13 said they were missing key mathematical skills. So this is being able to read and write mathematical notation, and also being able to work with proofs as well. It was slightly different to the first theme where we spoke about struggles with proof and abstraction. This was specifically about the skills needed for proof. So it was again that reading and writing and being able to convey ideas properly. And 8 departments said that students have low mathematical resilience. So this was them giving up on problems too easily. And again, some quotes. So time management seems to be a struggle. And I think sometimes they expect to be told almost everything explicitly, what paragraphs of the notes to study and for how long. So I guess the question then is, are departments teaching students learning how to learn? Because there has been literature around the fact that students don't necessarily know how to become independent learners, and they don't actually know how to manage their, they're not sure how to learn at university because it's such a new environment. So we asked departments to what extent their institution reported providing any training for students in learning how to study independently and or make the best use of learning opportunities. 7 said no training provided. 6 said little training or passive encouragement. So this was a department saying that they tell students that they expect them to be independent. 5 said that they provide guidance and resources, but students are the ones who have to choose to access it. So it's available on the virtual learning environment. Then only 7 departments actually said that they run training sessions. And you might notice that these frequencies don't add up to 30. Some departments didn't answer this question at all. So read into that what you will. But I think the key thing is that there's I think this could be better. I think we could do better at teaching students on how to study properly. So the ones that did talk about training sessions, one department described how they run tutorial-like sessions where they give advice to students on how to make good notes, how to manage their time, and how to prioritise different areas of their work. Another stated that they orchestrate interactions between students in different year groups, so they learn from their peers. I really, really like this idea. I think it's a great, it takes the pressure off staff to maybe go over this in their tutorials if they don't have time. Instead, it's sort of encouraging this peer interaction, which we saw earlier, can be really beneficial to students. And actually these types of initiatives, so sort of teaching students how to study properly, have been shown to be successful, in particular for students at risk. So students who were, this study looked at students who were either retaking modules or they failed first year and were retaking it. And they'd shown that by participating in these initiatives, the students who did participate in them really, really they sort of moved on leaps and bounds in their ability to manage their learning properly. Lots of departments did acknowledge in this question that this is an area of improvement for them and that they would really like to implement more training, and this is something that they want to work on. So in conclusion, to summarise, some departments are proactively working to develop a sense of community using math study spaces. There is some discussion about moving towards more active learning. Some departments are actively teaching students how to learn effectively. And some departments have reported recent curriculum reviews to ease the transition for students. Some have moved away from traditional office hours, and there is some acknowledgement that feedback is not always effective. And I do think that the key word throughout this is some. This is a small number of departments that are looking at implementing interventions to help students, but there are a lot of departments that are not doing anything. And I guess part of the paper that I'm writing about this is the fact that there was a lot of talk about the challenges that students face at the transition to university, but there was a lot less talk in comparison about what departments have in place to support students at the transition to university. So I'll briefly talk about some further work that I'm going to be doing in my PhD. So the first one is getting some student perspectives on what I've just spoken about. So I've been interviewing students in our department. I've done 42 hour-long interviews across all years, which I'm now realising the analysis for is a huge amount of work. But I am really, really excited to see what we get from it, because the interviews, the students I spoke to were so honest. And I do think that we're going to get some really useful insight from them. We're specifically investigating how students engage with their course. So not if they engage, if do you do this, do you do that? It's why do you do it? How are you doing it? How are you learning? How are you getting your resources? And we're also going to be exploring whether this changes through the years. So I've got, a third from first year, third from second year, third from third year, and seeing whether their learning strategies change. The other thing is we do have ethical approval to look at their results. So hopefully we might be able to see whether some learning strategies implemented by students correlates to the results that they get. In terms of the staff perspectives, I would absolutely love to expand this work. I would love to employ this methodology elsewhere. And actually, I would really, really like to come over to Australia for the Delta conference if you would have me. But if I was traveling that far, I think that might be a really good opportunity for me to incorporate a research visit and potentially do some of this methodology over in Australia. And the questions I'd like to ask is, do the challenges recognised by staff differ between countries? And what are other countries doing to support students at the transition to university? So yeah, if anybody thinks that their department might be interested in sort of getting involved in such a thing, where I might be able to conduct interviews or focus groups, or even speak to Mathematics Support Centre staff, then do get in touch. I'd be really grateful. Here are my references. Sorry, they're very long. Thank you very much for listening.